The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Coming up, we'll hear from one of the leaders behind a ballot initiative to legalize sports betting in Missouri. We'll also talk with Senate Minority Leader John Rizzo about what his fellow Democratic senators expect in the waning days of the Missouri General Assembly session. But first, the saga around an ethics complaint against Missouri House Speaker Dean Plocher appears to have come to an end this week. A bipartisan group of Republican and Democratic legislators were looking into a multitude of claims, and that includes how Plocher got House reimbursements for travel expenses that were already paid for by his campaign. And the committee also looked into departures from his staff and whether he improperly tried to implement a private constituent management system. In the end, the Ethics Committee voted down a report that would have recommended a letter of disapproval for Plocher. But the scuttled report was still made public, and it raised questions about whether Plocher obstructed this investigation. Here to talk about this story is Jason Hancock, the editor of the Missouri Independent. The online news publication broke the story of Plocher's woes last year. Jason, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jason, it seems like there were a lot of moving pieces with this ethics complaint. What exactly was Plocher being accused of here?
As you said, there's lots of different facets, but the three main components that the Ethics Committee were looking at were, number one, whether he was improperly pushing the House to enter into a software contract with a private company, and in the midst of that push, whether he was unethically threatening nonpartisan staff who had raised some red flags about that contract. Number two was whether he sort of circled around these sort of illegal reimbursements that he got, where he had paid for things with campaign money, but then filed for reimbursement so that the taxpayers would pay him back for those as if they were personal expenses. And then number three is the firing of his chief of staff last year and whether that constituted retaliation against a whistleblower. Those were the three main components that were sort of the focus of the ethics investigation from the outset.
So one of the obvious questions that even veterans of the Missouri General Assembly may have, including me, is if the Ethics Committee voted 6-2 to reject this report, how exactly did its contents become public?
It was a surprise to all of us. You know, I had spent quite a bit of time with colleagues in the press corps outside of a closed hearing room in the Capitol basement the week before, because all these hearings, they're confidential, they're closed session. It's almost like an HR proceeding in a lot of ways. And so we're just sort of left trying to read the tea leaves. You know, if you hear laughter behind the door, does that mean a good thing, a bad thing? And on Monday we came and we expected more of the same, a closed door hearing where we were never going to get any details. And that the participants weren't going to be able to talk to us. They stayed in open session. The chair of the committee, Representative Hancock, put forth a motion to vote on a report. The committee studied it for a little bit, voted it down, clearly because they wanted to go into closed session and have more discussion. Representative Kelly wouldn't allow that. They voted it down. She adjourned. And then, to the surprise of everyone, the committee members started to take the report and hand it back in, which, as I presume, is the kind of thing they were doing with all the documents they received in these confidential hearings, giving them back to the attorney and to the chair to be kept confidential. And that's when Representative Kelly said, no, you can keep it. It's an open record now. It was introduced in open session. And that's how this came out.
We'll get to that part a little bit later, but let's go through some of the findings of this report. So one of the things that I've always thought of, especially after the Missouri Independent broke the story about the reimbursements, is it's going to be really difficult to prove that Plocher intentionally sought reimbursements that he already knew were already reimbursed from his campaign. Like, unless he had emails saying, haha, I'm going to try to get these official reimbursements that I've already got reimbursed for. Like, we can't peer inside his head. And I don't know if there was any like emails or texts to that effect. Was that always going to be a difficult thing to prove in terms of his intent?
Yeah, and I don't know that the ethics committee necessarily were searching for intent. They're not really talking about a lot of those details. I think it's true that those were violations. It's true that they were illegal. Obviously, he signs affidavits with these reimbursements saying, this came out of my pocket. This did not come from anywhere else. But as to getting to like what was in his heart and what was in his head when he was doing these things, I mean, there's some circumstantial evidence. He was pressing really hard for there was a trip to Hawaii that he went on to attend a conference, and he had bought the tickets with campaign money, the plane tickets to get out there, but he had missed the deadline for turning in the reimbursement, and so then he's haggling with the House administration to try to get them to give the money back. And this was several $1,000s at this point. I think it was about $1,900 maybe, but and so you can kind of glean like, well, how did he not know? Like this was a lot of money, and he's got to deal with a lot of paperwork. But as far as getting into like, as you said, like where was his head at when he was doing all this? I mean, that's probably a task too large even for the ethics committee to handle.
Now, when we're talking about the constituent management contract, I heard an interview with David Steelman, who was an attorney for Plocher, or maybe he still is. And one of the points that he made was like Plocher didn't have the unilateral power to issue a new constituent management contract. That would have to go through the Office of Administration, probably because the cost required that sort of step. What do you make of that argument? And what do you make of the argument from Plocher's defenders that he's not this all-powerful constituent management implementer wizard that people are saying he is?
I mean, that could very well be true, but I know that if you look at the records and the documents that came out in the aftermath of that push, it does seem as though he was pushing very hard behind the scenes to get the House Administration Committee, not the state's sort of contracting arm, to approve that contract. There was very little talk about putting it out to bid, at least in the public records, and that was raising a lot of heartburn amongst a lot of these nonpartisan staffers. That was the big thing that they were concerned about is this thing getting forced through without any sort of oversight? And it all kind of came to a head at a hearing in last September in the House Administration Committee where they discussed the possibility of making the switch. There was a lot of concern about what would happen putting constituent information in the hands of private company. And ultimately that idea was kind of tossed, and they decided to stick with the in-house program that they had. So I think that probably in a perfect world, that's exactly as Mr. Steelman explained, like how the process should have worked. It doesn't seem as though, at least from the records that we received during that saga, that was at least the speaker's thoughts about how this would go. And that's what raised so many red flags internally, at least that kind of got this whole thing to break out into the open.
So the big quote that I think a lot of people have honed in on is from an attorney for the committee. And she said, quote, "I have not encountered more unwilling witnesses in any investigation in my career. The level of fear expressed by a number of potential witnesses is a daunting factor in completing this investigation." And I mean, without more witnesses, I don't know if you could have proven either intent around the reimbursements or if anything improper happened with the constituent management system. So is that basically why they couldn't definitively find that he did like certain things wrong that they were investigating, the lack of cooperation from witnesses?
I think there's a couple things at play. I think that's definitely the huge part. If you can't get the people with the knowledge, a lot of the report talks about people that had information that would have been valuable for the committee who were unwilling to come forward out of fear of retaliation, or there was indications or at least allegations of potential threats either by the speaker's office or his allies. There's also the piece that, while the last few weeks, the speaker's office, the speaker himself, his allies and associates have been decrying how long this process has played out, been hammering the committee saying that this was intentional, it's being drug out to hurt him politically. when we see the records that were included, and setting aside the allegations of witness tampering, just looking at the records that were provided, while he was publicly decrying how long the process took, he was privately and behind the scenes throwing sand in the gears of the investigation by not cooperating with the investigator for 3 months, by refusing to sign subpoenas for 2 months. So that's a big part of the allegation of obstruction, is not just the witness piece, but also the other side of it with the refusal to cooperate. They say it repeatedly in that report that made it really hard for the investigation to run its course and do its work. And at the same time that all that's happening, it's being the delays are being weaponized to kind of undermine the eventual determination that the committee was hoping to come to.
We're talking with Jason Hancock, the editor of the Missouri Independent, about the ethics investigation on Missouri House Speaker Dean Plocher. So you mentioned the scrutiny, and there has been a lot of scrutiny on State Representative Hannah Kelly, the Ethics Committee chairwoman. Some of Plocher's surrogates have not only, as you said, criticized her for the length of the investigation, they've gone like a step further. They've inferred that like she's been a disgrace to her family who have been involved in Missouri politics for a long time. And she put out a statement on Facebook, and I want to read part of it. Unfortunately, because of the efforts by the speaker to threaten witnesses, block our investigation, and prevent this process from reaching its natural conclusion, there's nothing more that can be done. The report speaks for itself, as do the votes of the committee members. However, because of the culture of fear and retaliation discussed in the report, I have grave concerns about the environment that is developing in the House. What do you make of that statement, and what do you make of the fierce criticism from Plocher's surrogates against Representative Kelly?
I'll start with the second part first. It's really interesting because we have to remember, and Jason, you know this from years of covering the State House, like the ethics chair is a pretty important appointment that the speaker makes because it's a terrible job. You're kind of like the internal affairs in a lot of ways. You have to weigh the fate of your colleagues if they're accused of ethical violations, harassment. And Dean Plocher appointed Hannah Kelly.
And just to interrupt, like she's already the chairwoman of the Children's and Families Committee, which is another thankless committee job, but a very important one given that the Children's Division is under so much turmoil. But continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, that says that at least at some point, Dean Plocher felt that she was not only capable, but was, you know, one of the most, was given 2 chairmanships that are highly important and very difficult. And so it is interesting now to see that, like, as this process drags on, the other side is demonizing her, making her sound like incompetent, easily manipulated. It's very surprising. I didn't expect that turn. I didn't expect them to go at her so personally. As far as her statement that she posted on Facebook, I mean, she went a lot further than she did when she was addressing reporters. But I think it's coming from a place like that is honest to her. I think she's looking around and saying, like, we're trying to do this job. We've been undermined at every step of the way. That's her allegation. We've been demonized. They demanded transparency. Well, here you go. And like, it's also telling that after that report was released and they adjourned that Monday, the rest of the hearings that week were canceled, and we're sort of left in this impasse of nothing's been approved, nothing's been dismissed. Everybody's sort of pointing the finger at everyone else, and we're left with this report that seems to document some really dark allegations against the speaker that, you know, at some point he'll have to answer for, one would think, and try to address some of these things he's been accused of.
Well, let's talk about that. Plocher did not seem to want to talk about this ethics report at all when the House adjourned and he went before reporters yesterday.
Speaker, are you considering replacing Hannah Kelly on the... I would, hey, listen, fellas, this isn't about me. This is about them. This is about Missourians, 6.1 million Missourians and our children, our educational system. This isn't about me today. Any other questions concerning this education bill?
The report from the committee, of course, it was a draft report, but...
Well, again, did you not just hear me? Listen, I'm shutting this down. You guys don't get it. A great day for 6.1 million Missourians, our kids, our teachers, our administrators. Thank you all. Amen.
That is House Speaker Dean Plocher cutting short a press conference yesterday with reporters. So I've known Plocher for a while. This seems out of character for him because he's never been this short with the press. I also recall that when his chief of staff, Rod Jetton, was speaker and he faced a lot of controversy about a lot of things, he often had very robust question and answer sessions with reporters. about these things and was willing to answer anything. What do you make of the fact that he just doesn't seem to want to talk about this publicly?
It's hard to put your finger on, because I agree that before this session, he was a pretty accessible speaker. He was regularly interacting with the press. And I get when, times get tough, maybe you don't want to answer these questions that might be uncomfortable. But when you say it's out of character, it is out of character maybe previously. But this session, more press conferences have ended with him storming out than haven't. I can think of 3 or 4 right off the top of my head. There's, I think, maybe just one that he made it all the way to the end of without storming out angrily. It doesn't make a lot of sense. One of them was, I think, a day or two after the mass shooting in the Kansas City Super Bowl parade. He was asked his thoughts on it. He refused to answer. And when somebody asked another question, he stormed out. So there's this sort of temper that's happening this session. Maybe it's the stress of being under investigation. Maybe it's, maybe there's other things going on. I honestly don't know. But it is unusual that he's being accused of these things. Threatening witnesses, whether in personally or his allies, obstructing the investigation. These are serious allegations that you'd think he would want to answer or at least give his take on. And so far, he's decided he's just not going to.
My final question for you before I let you go. One of the things I noticed is there did not seem to be a Democratic pile-on. In fact, a number of Democratic committee members voted against finalizing this report. What do you make of that? I think that was kind of noticeable, at least to me.
Yeah, as far as the committee vote, it's hard to read the tea leaves on exactly what those votes meant. Did they mean they disagreed with the report, they wanted changes? Maybe. Did they think maybe it didn't go far enough? Maybe. I think a few of them voted no because they wanted more discussion, or they were kind of upset with Hannah Kelly, who admittedly did not tell them ahead of time what she was going to do and that this was going to happen in open session. So it's hard to say exactly why people voted the way they did. But you're right, 4 Democrats voted no, only along with 2 other Republicans. But more broadly speaking, the Democrats haven't joined in the pile-on. I think there's some ideological reasons for that. Maybe they just think that some of the Republicans are being hypocrites. I've heard some say, you don't condemn Donald Trump, but you condemn Dean Plocher. How is that fair? I also think there's an argument to be made that when your enemy is fighting itself, you get out of the way. So there's probably a little bit of politics in that as well.
Jason Hancock is the editor of the Missouri Independent, which wrote extensively about the controversy around House Speaker Dean Plocher. Jason, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
When we get back, we'll talk with Senate Minority Leader John Rizzo about how Senate Democrats plan to approach the end of the 2024 session. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Missouri Democrats are in the minority in both the House and the Senate, but Senate Democrats have much more power to affect the flow of legislation, thanks to the chamber's tradition of a strong filibuster and divides within the Senate GOP. Now, with the Senate winding down, Senate Democrats are preparing for big fights over the state budget and renewing a critical tax paying for the state's Medicaid program. Joining us now is Senate Minority Leader John Rizzo. Rizzo represents Missouri's 11th senatorial district, which includes parts of Jackson County. Senator, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
So, as I'm sure you know, there were very low expectations for session this year, primarily because it's an election year, and there are pressures around that, and there was palpable infighting within the Senate GOP last year and this year. Do you think the legislature managed to do anything to exceed those dire expectations?
I would argue not thus far, but I'm on the opposite page of this. I think there's a lot of time left in session, man. I mean, Jason, you've been around these sessions a long time.
Yes, I have.
And that last week of session, a lot can happen. So, we'll see what happens in the lead up to that. But as far as I'm concerned, in my 14 years, this far out, there's still a lot of time for a lot of things to happen.
So there was one thing that passed this week that was very significant, and this was a wide-ranging education bill that was sent to Governor Parson. It features a lot of things your caucus doesn't like the expansion of a tax credit program that could provide private school scholarships. But it did manage to get through the Senate, I think, without a major filibuster. Why do you think this was able to make it through the process, given that quote-unquote education reform has always had a hard time getting off the ground?
Sure. I just think that when we sat down and we worked the details out of the deal, and Senator Arthur and some staff members did just an amazing job with it, we were able to secure a lot of good things for public education. And while for the Democrats in the Senate, it was hard for us to vote yes on it because of the vouchers and Boone County charter school expansion, there was still a ton of stuff in there for public education, as well as teacher pay raises and encouragement of the 5-day school week, which is a big deal in Independence, Missouri, and things like that. I couldn't vote for it. I don't think none of the Senate Dems ended up voting for it, but I don't besmirch anybody that did.
I think one of the criticisms that I heard in the House is that a lot of the funding for things like, boosting teacher pay is subject to appropriation, and it may not actually materialize. I'm sure you heard those arguments. Do you think that they hold water?
Not really. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it is something that we'll be able to track from here on out. And so if they decide to not fund it, we'll be able to know what happens. Look, there wasn't a world where we love this bill. There's stuff in it to like, there's stuff in it to hate, and that's part of a good compromise. It's tremendously difficult when the Senate Pro Tem is from Boone County and has all the tools of the trade to sort of get a bill through the Senate that he's been working on, quite honestly, for years. So we were in a tough situation fighting uphill when you have the Senate Pro Tem's priority, something that he's worked on for a long time that he wants to get through. We tried to shoot him some of our wish list, and sure enough, it came back. There was a ton of things that they were willing to give up to get this stuff done, and at that point, we decided to let the bill go, even though we couldn't really vote for it.
So there's still a lot to get done, despite the aforementioned, shot that I gave about the low expectations, including reauthorizing the federal reimbursement allowance, which is a tax hospitals place upon themselves to fund the state's Medicaid program. I know it's been intertwined with this other bill that is trying to steer state money away from Planned Parenthood, and I think that bill is stuck in the House. Do you see this FRA impasse being cleared before May 17th?
That's the $4.5 billion question. Honestly, I know Senator Huff was taking a pretty strong stance that he wasn't going to go into markup until it was resolved. I think that they have decided to go ahead and do that next week, which I think is continuing progress. But I don't know. I mean, that's going to be up to the Freedom Caucus, and that's going to be up to the Republican leadership and how far they're willing to go in order to maintain funding in the healthcare system to the tune of $4.5 billion, which dramatically affects rural Missouri's healthcare system.
I know this is kind of an odd question, but if you can't get this done by May 17th for some reason, could you see a situation where Democrats and Republicans join together to previous question this bill, which for our listeners would be to end a filibuster? And I don't think Democrats have ever joined Republicans to PQ anything in the state's history, but this seems pretty important. You're talking about over $4 billion. It seems like this at desperate times calls for desperate measures situation.
Yeah, I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, that's the nuclear option, right? I mean, that is the place where nobody ever wants to go, right? That's the thing that keeps Caleb and myself, the Senate Pro Tem and the floor leader and myself talking all the time, is because we never want to have to use anything like that against one another or join together to use it against anybody else. So I can tell you right now, there has not been any serious talks about that at all. I don't feel like we would be in any position at this point to begin to talk about shutting down debate. It's happened to me while I was there. Senator Hageman moved the previous question on the issue of the minimum wage increase. It was mass chaos. There was a lot of hard feelings afterwards. And if, in fact, that measure's taken, I could pretty well assure you that session is over. And next year will probably be affected as well.
On the budget, which the Senate needs to create its own version, you probably have heard a lot of arguments from people like State Senator Bill Eigel, a Republican from Weldon Spring, who's talking about how the budget is too big and it's an example of like state government spending being out of control. What do you make of that argument? Because I think if you get the FRA impasse done, you then have to pass the budget. And I'm sure you're going to hear that argument a lot from the aforementioned Freedom Caucus, which is like a group of Republican senators who agitate pretty openly against GOP leadership in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, look, they continue to rabble-rouse on whatever issue it is. Most of the time, the things that they accuse and talk about are things like cutting the budget to draconian levels, but then don't offer a way to do that without sacrificing public service like police and firefighters and roads and bridges. Look, it's real easy to stand up on the Senate floor and say, you're never going to have to pay taxes again, free recess for everybody, and ice cream on Fridays. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to balance a budget and you have to provide services to people in this state. And I would wish a lot of these Republicans, especially the ones that live in the rural areas, would look at some of their communities that are suffering because of that attitude. Right? The people in rural Missouri that can't get roads and bridges paved or built, that have a tough time accessing health care, that have a tough time being able to see any sort of medical professional. They espouse these beliefs because it gets them votes while their citizens and their constituents suffer.
The other thing that is left undone that's kind of looming in the background is a measure that, if passed by the legislature, would go to voters to make the Constitution more difficult to amend. And it seems that the House has placed things like banning non-citizens from voting back in there after it was taken out of the Senate. How do you see that entire what proponents call IP reform ending? Do you think the legislature will put something on the ballot, or is this something that just may fizzle out after a lot of hue and cry and attention on it for the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, this. I've had a lot of questions about this, honestly, and this is pretty simple for us. If it has ballot candy and comes back to the Senate, we intend to fully filibuster as long as we possibly can, so that people can have an honest look at what it is. If they choose to pick it up in the House and take the ballot candy off and put it on the ballot, then that's a fair fight, and that's kind of what we wanted. That's all we always said, is all we wanted was a fair fight. And they go in there and they put all this stuff in about immigrants and voting and all of these hyperbolic things, most of which, by the way, are already illegal by Constitution or state law, just so people get confused and they end up voting against one thing or another instead of what's really happening, and that's raising the threshold on getting something in the Constitution and taking people's voice away.
So I think that there's no question that this is being pushed because there's also a ballot campaign to try to legalize abortion in the state. We don't know if it has enough signatures, and I talked with Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft yesterday. Their office told me that they're not planning on using what's called random sampling at this time, but Ashcroft said no decision has been officially made about whether they're going to do that, and that could potentially mean if they have enough signatures, it could go in August as opposed to November. Is there a feeling among abortion rights supporters about when they would prefer it to go on the ballot? Because I've heard pros and cons either way.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, it's just about getting it on the ballot. Obviously, I think more people are able to weigh in November. That's just usually traditionally how elections work. More people vote in a presidential November election than they do in an August primary. Having said that, I'm fully confident that whatever month they put it on, whenever they ask the people how they feel about it, overwhelming support will be for women restoring rights over their bodies.
I think that especially nationally, there's been a lot of discussion about the political impact of ballot initiatives that protect abortion rights. But I've also heard from people it's kind of a double-edged sword for Democrats. It's a way for getting policies over the finish line, but it kind of gives voters that don't like certain Republican policies, but they like others, kind of an out where they can like pick and choose issues, but still vote for Republicans. What do you think about that phenomenon? Because that's been theorized that like people thinking that if this is on in November, Democrats are going to win everything they kind of temper the expectations based off that theory.
Yeah, and this honestly goes back to the whole IP and initiative petition debate. If they make it harder to put things on the ballot that we've seen, like marijuana and everything else like that, they're going to start changing the legislature. And I have cautioned every Republican that is pushing this initiative petition reform to make the threshold higher to allow people to change the Constitution. I have cautioned Republicans, you be careful, because that's your outlet, right? That's the thing that allows them to go around the legislature. And if they can't do that and they can't go around the legislature, they're going to start changing the legislature. Well, as a Democrat who's been in the super minority for 14 years now, I am very hopeful that someday they will change the legislature and give Democrats an opportunity to govern again in this state so that we can show them how governing really works.
Senator John Rizzo is a Democrat from Independence and the Senate Minority Leader. Senator Rizzo, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jason.
When we come back, we'll talk with a representative from a group seeking to legalize sports betting in Missouri. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. If it wasn't for my crippling fear of losing lots of money gambling and the fact that I live in Missouri, I would be able to make a very unsound bet that the Milwaukee Bucks will win the 2024 NBA Finals. But the reality is I do call the Show Me State home, and unlike Illinois, betting on sports on, say, your phone is illegal here. But that could be changing. A group called Winning for Missouri Education is circulating a ballot initiative to break a years-long sports wagering impasse. And here to talk about this issue at length is Jack Cardetti, a longtime political consultant who has worked on a number of successful ballot campaigns, including this one. Jack, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Always great to be with you, Jason.
Let's start with a simple question. If your initiative is approved, how would people be able to bet on sports in Missouri?
Yeah, sure. Right now, Missouri's one of only a dozen states that hasn't legalized sports betting. And that means we lose out on millions of dollars that could be going to our classrooms and millions of dollars of economic opportunity. So if this ballot initiative passes, Missourians will be able to place sports bet in a responsible, regulated manner. They'll be able to do that at professional sporting venues. They'll be able to do that at the casinos. And the Missouri Gaming Commission will select a couple of mobile providers where Missourians will be able to place those responsible bets.
Would people be able to bet on college sports, or would this just be pro sports?
No, they would be able to bet on both.
And before we continue our conversation, I'd like to invite you into this conversation. Do you support legal sports gambling in Missouri? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can send us a tweet at STL on air or email us at talk@stlpr.org. So one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because backers of sports betting need to go through the initiative petition process because there's been a deadlock for years in the legislature. And Senator Denny Hoskins has said it doesn't make sense to just legalize sports betting without also legalizing video lottery terminals, which are gaming machines and gas stations and fraternal halls. Here is Senator Hoskins talking with both me and Sarah Kellogg earlier this year.
I think that we could actually get this solved if we left all the special interests out of the room, and I sat down with some of the advocates for sports betting as well as video lottery terminals. I think that we could come up to agreement, but unfortunately, the casinos have wielded a lot of power here in the Missouri legislature and have killed any effort of compromise to include video lottery terminals in a comprehensive gambling package.
That is Senator Denny Hoskins, a Republican from Warrensburg. Jack, you've probably been following this impasse very closely. What do you make of the senator's comments?
Yeah, I mean, this is the exact reason why we're out there collecting signatures as we speak. And quite frankly, we've been overwhelmed with how enthusiastic Missouri voters are when we talk to them about sports betting. I mean, every year the legislature fails to get this done. Meanwhile, 7 of the 8 border states in Missouri have sports betting. And yet we're also 46th right now in average teacher pay. So clearly, these are revenues that can and should be going to our classrooms. Every single day, we see Missourians crossing the river over into Illinois or crossing State Line Road over into Kansas, placing bets and coming back here. Or quite frankly, we see Missourians placing billions in illegal offshore gaming websites or whatever. Neither of those are constructive for Missouri's economy. And so let's take the common sense approach of bringing this to the people, where we're pretty sure Missourians are going to support allowing regulated sports betting and making sure the money goes towards education.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Can you talk about how money would be collected from this initiative and where it would go?
Yeah, so there'll be a 10% tax on betting, and then that money will be dedicated as permanent funding for Missouri classrooms.
I want to talk about and who ends up paying the tax on this? I know is it licensees? Is it also just people who place bets? Like who actually puts the money to the state, basically?
Yeah, the licensees would pay that.
So your initiative says that the Missouri Gaming Commission can only issue 2 mobile licenses to operate sports wagering in the state. So would that mean if a company other than I'm going to throw 2 companies out here, DraftKings or FanDuel, wants to set up shop in Missouri, they wouldn't be able to?
Well, that'll be entirely up to the Missouri Gaming Commission. But again, Missourians will be able to place bets at the casinos that we have right now, at professional sporting venues, along with these mobile sites. But again, it's the Missouri Gaming Commission that'll end up selecting that.
But let's just say I wanted to create a sports service called Rosenbaum, and it was very well constructed, and it was going to be better than DraftKings or FanDuel. Would I just be out of luck? Would I have to go to Illinois in order to operate in Missouri?
No, you would just need to go convince the Missouri Gaming Commission that you ought to be one of those 2 licensees.
Oh, I think I would be very persuasive. But let's go to Donovan from South County. Donovan, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your question?
Well, my comment. I've been on school board in the Limerick School District for 8 years, and I can tell you that the idea of allowing sports betting to aid education is a foolish argument. Years ago, the argument of allowing gambling on boats was made to allow improvement in education. And it's a ruse. What happens is the money goes into the state treasury, the general treasury, and that money then is spent out by the legislature as they see fit. The idea that it's going to improve education is phony. It's going to be more money to the state, but the state can do whatever they want with the money.
Thank you, Donovan. You've heard that argument a lot from opponents of expanding gambling, that like education money could just get supplanted. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons we're putting this in the Missouri Constitution. This money has to go towards Missouri education. It has to go towards our classrooms. And quite frankly, Missouri education can use this permanent funding. This will be funding that goes on into perpetuity. We know that sports betting is here. It's here to stay. And we think it'll be a nice funding source that will help classrooms throughout the state.
Let's go to Dwight from Dutchtown. Dwight, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Good afternoon. I grew up in New Jersey, worked as a banker in New Jersey. New Jersey has been doing sports betting, gambling generally, for a very long time. And I have to say that I have to echo what the board member just mentioned about the futility of trying to fund education with the proceeds of gambling. It's just it's a fool's errand. The big problem, though, is the impact on the behavior of citizens and the impact of compulsive gambling. In when you have that kind of an outlet that is that responds to impulse on a cell phone, in particular. It makes the decision to make a bet an incredibly casual affair. And in New York, we have, 2 baseball teams, 2 football teams, basketball teams, you name it, Brooklyn and New Jersey, and hockey teams in abundance. And the gambling scene, the sports betting scene in particular, is out of control.
Dwight, thank you for your call. And that was going to get to another question. Like, I understand the point that, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense for Missouri to not have sports betting when you can just go across into Illinois or to Kansas. But what would this initiative do to make sure if people are addicted to gambling that there is some sort of outlet that they can go to bet more responsibly?
Yeah, when we were putting this initiative together, we actually worked with the National Council on Problem Gaming, and they have really praised the problem gaming provisions in our initiative. This would be dedicated funding for a problem gaming fund here in Missouri, and that's something that these national outlets have praised, because we don't see that in a lot of other states. This is one of the reasons that, while unfortunately we're going to be the 38th state to have sports betting, we've been able to look at what has worked and what hasn't worked in other states when it comes to this. And so that's why we've worked so closely with the National Council on Problem Gaming to make sure we have the appropriate safeguards in place.
We're talking with Jack Cardetti, who is with a group called Winning for Missouri Education that is circulating a ballot initiative to break a years-long sports wagering impasse. There's a couple of notable things about this that you touched on that I want to expand upon. So how would casinos be able to do sports betting? I've been to Las Vegas. I've seen places inside casinos where there's hundreds of TVs and you can go up to a teller and place a bet. Do you expect that sort of setup will be available in Missouri casinos if this initiative passes?
Yeah, I do think you'll be able to see sort of a sports book like we'd see in a casino. It clearly is an area that people are extremely interested in. We're losing that type of money every day to our bordering states. And so having that there for Missourians, we think will be important. I mean, Jason, to kind of give you a little detail about how interested Missourians are in this, on Super Bowl weekend alone, 431,000 Missourians attempted to bet that weekend. They were unable to because they were in the confines of Missouri. And so there's a ton of interest here. Unfortunately, a lot of those individuals that weren't able to place bets here in Missouri either went to our neighboring states to place those bets, or they did it using illegal offshore gaming websites. Neither of those are good for the Missouri economy. Neither of those are good for our classrooms. This is the responsible way to go about ushering this in.
Do you support legal sports gambling in Missouri? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Now, another notable thing is that all the sports teams, professional sports teams, are supporting this. And I guess it's because they could create a geo-fenced area in or around the stadium where people could bet on games. How would that am I describing how that would functionally work correctly if this initiative is passed?
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct, Jason. So really the start of our coalition here in Missouri were the 6 professional sports teams. They view this as a great way to increase fan engagement. They also are a competitive disadvantage to other teams in other states that have this revenue stream. And so that's exactly how it would work here in Missouri. I know that all 6 of our professional sports teams are really excited about this. They've helped us go and collect signatures, and we're looking forward to turning those in early next month.
Why do you think it would be beneficial for sports teams to be in this arena? Do they make more money off of it if they're offering some sort of outlet for people to place bets at stadiums?
Yeah, for a lot of, again, 38 states have been able to set up a program like this, and the professional sports teams that are there, depending on how the law is written, that's a brand new revenue source for them. And so it puts our teams at a competitive disadvantage here. The teams also believe it really helps increase fan engagement.
So I'm going to go back to Senator Hoskins again. He has expressed doubts that sports betting will garner that much revenue. And that's been kind of his core argument about why he's been pushing the legalization of video lottery terminals so much. He thinks it will produce a lot more revenue. Here's Senator Hoskins again.
Many people think that this is the golden goose. I mean, Kansas thought that it was the golden goose when they passed sports betting. and they were going to be able to have millions of dollars in order to lure professional sports teams to the state of Kansas, and that simply has not happened. Sports betting is not the golden goose. Nobody besides the casinos and teams, professional sports teams, are getting rich off of sports betting.
That is Senator Denny Hoskins, a Republican from Warrensburg, who is not a fan of just legalizing sports betting in isolation. So, Jack, is he right? Is this not as big of a golden goose as us golden goose seekers are wanting in terms of its revenue for the state?
No, we've analyzed this. We know that this will produce tens of millions of dollars each year for Missouri education. I mean, it just is intuitive. There are, again, 431,000 people try to bet on Super Bowl weekend alone here in the state of Missouri. So there absolutely is the interest. The initiative is set up in a way that makes sure that that money goes to education. It'll be tens of millions of dollars each and every year in permanent funding. Right now, because of politicians in Jeff City, Missouri's taking in no money from this. And in fact, we're losing out from people, the Missourians that are going to our border states, placing these bets, helping our neighboring economies, where this would really bring in a common sense way to allow Missourians to bet on sports in a responsible, regulated manner and do so in a way that helps fund our classrooms.
I would imagine people tried to bet on Super Bowl Sunday because the Kansas City, Missouri Chiefs were playing in the game. If it was my Chicago Bears that were playing, I don't know if that many people would have bet. So is that really a good example to put forward?
Well, even if the Chicago Bears somehow happen to get in the Super Bowl, Jason, there still would be Missourians that would be extremely interested in that. We know that. We see it time and time again. And this is just this is an issue where Missouri is now one of only 12 states that doesn't have this, and so 7 of our 8 bordering states have it. So we really think that this is time to do this. We're so glad that the professional sports teams here in Missouri have really been leading the way on this initiative. And, the recent public polling on this is pretty good. I mean, the last 2 public polls that have come out show that 62% of Missourians and 60% of Missourians support sports betting. And I think what shows that this really isn't a political issue is that sports betting also enjoys majority support amongst Republicans, Democrats, and independents in both of those polls.
Let's go to Calvin in South County. Calvin, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour in St. Louis on the Air.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to comment. I mean, everybody's been making very good points. I think it's definitely time to get this done. I mean, we're seeing strong support for all these signatures to get it legalized. It's not only good for the economy, but it will support, the future generations, which, is completely understandable for doing. I mean, we're losing out on all this money. Everybody's going over to Illinois. It's so easy to go over there and do it. Missouri is losing out completely. It's almost like the cannabis situation that we went through a couple years ago. I mean, it's getting out of hand. I think it's a big political issue. I think Missouri needs to get it done. It's time. We're losing out on money, and people are going to do it anyway.
Thank you, Calvin. You know a lot about that cannabis initiative, Jack, since you were also heavily involved in it. But you heard the criticism of that, that was creating a very closed and insular market. And I could understand the reasoning why you don't want people to bet at gas stations and fraternal halls, but what would you make of the argument that the way this is a limited system may benefit the sports teams and the casinos and the 2 mobile apps at the expense of competition?
No, this will really make it, fairly easy for Missourians to access the sports betting. They can do so in person at those venues. They could do so, online. And so we think this is a system that has worked in 38 other states. It's a system that can work here, and it frankly will work here. After Missourians support this in November, Missourians will be able to place these bets that they're already placing, but they're going to be placing them in a responsible, safeguarded manner. And they'll have lots of options on how they want to place those bets here under this system.
Jack Cardetti is with Winning for Missouri Education, which is circulating a ballot initiative to legalize sports betting. Jack, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, Jason.
Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wissentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich, and our production intern is Roche Hemmings.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.